The priest, the rector of St. Anne's Church, gave me a secret note that read, "Don't come home. Run." That night, I discovered that my own family had planned the gas explosion at the coffee shop, a plot orchestrated by my eldest daughter-in-law to steal everything I had. But they didn't know that I had a secret that would change their lives forever. Before continuing, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying what time it is where you are. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 70 years old, and for most of my life, I believe that family was the one thing you could never lose. For 45 years, I thought I had raised two loving sons. I was wrong. I opened it with my late husband, George, 32 years ago. Back then, the floors smelled of new pine, and we made cinnamon waffles every Sunday. George used to hum old jazz songs while I brewed coffee. I can still hear him sometimes when I open the shop before sunrise, the sound of him tapping the counter saying, "Morning, love, let's make this place smell like home." When George passed, the shop became my companion. Every morning at 6, I'd unlock the glass door, switch on the lights, and feel a small pulse of warmth. Familiarity was my anchor. My two sons, Edward and Daniel, said they were proud of me for keeping it running. They said I was the heart of the family. But hearts, I learned, are the first things people take for granted. Edward, my oldest, used to sit by the window corner, drinking free coffee, checking sports bets on his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd lost his job at a finance firm a few years back, but never admitted the real reason: gambling. Vanessa, his wife, always had a soft voice when she asked me for small loans. I gave them more than I should have. I always did. Daniel, my younger boy, runs a small restaurant on the other side of town. His wife, Melissa, is sweet on the surface, the kind who always brings flowers on Mother's Day. But flowers wilt, and so does sincerity when it's bought with guilt. It was a Thursday morning when everything began to tilt. The air smelled like burnt coffee and spring rain. I was closing the shop early because I had an appointment downtown with my lawyer, Graham Mitchell. George and I had planned to update the business documents years ago, but I'd kept putting it off. Lately, I'd started noticing strange bank notifications, charges I didn't recognize, small, but frequent. I wanted advice, nothing more. Before heading out, I stopped by St. Anne's Church, like I often did. Father Michael was there, watering the small garden beside the chapel. He'd known George and me since our early days in Asheville. He looked worried that morning, and I noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the watering can. "Margaret," he said softly, "I've been meaning to speak to you." His voice carried that careful tone priests use when they have bad news but don't want to frighten you. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me an envelope, sealed but slightly wrinkled. "Someone left this at the parish office yesterday," he said. "They wanted you to have it. They didn't say who they were." "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know exactly. But before you open it, please, prepare your heart. Some truths arrive dressed as warnings." He looked at me the way George once did when he was about to tell me something that would change my world. I thanked him, tucked the envelope into my purse, and tried to shake off the unease. But as I drove toward downtown, my fingers kept brushing against it. When I reached the cafe's parking lot later that afternoon, I noticed Edward's truck and Daniel's car parked out front. Odd. They rarely came together. Inside, the place smelled different. Too clean, too forced, like someone had been trying to hide another scent. They were sitting at my counter, pretending to chat casually. Vanessa was pouring herself a cup of coffee, though I'd never seen her touch caffeine before. Melissa smiled, tight and rehearsed. "Mom," Edward said too brightly, "we were just talking about helping you out around here. You shouldn't be working so hard at your age." My age. Those two words stung. I put my purse on the counter, my hand brushing the envelope Father Michael had given me. "I'm fine," I said. "This shop keeps me alive." Vanessa laughed softly. "That's exactly what we're worried about." I watched her eyes flick to Edward, then to Daniel. They exchanged one of those glances that people think mothers don't notice. I'd seen it before, between gamblers and liars, between partners hiding something. Melissa stepped closer, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom, Daniel and I were just saying maybe it's time you took a break. We could run the cafe for a while. You could rest, maybe take a little trip." "A trip?" I asked. "And who would handle the accounts, the suppliers, the bills?" "Oh, don't worry," Edward said. "We've already talked to someone at the bank. We can take care of all that. You've done enough." My stomach turned cold. "Already talked to someone?" I repeated. "Why would you do that without me?" Edward shrugged. "Because you've been forgetting things lately. It's normal, Mom. You're 70. That word again. 70. Like a diagnosis. Vanessa touched my arm gently. "We're only trying to help. You left the stove on last week, remember?" "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." She smiled. "Of course you don't remember." Something inside me shifted then. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The sound of disbelief folding into fear. I excused myself and went to the back room. My hands were shaking. I pulled out the envelope Father Michael had given me and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of a document labeled Power of Attorney, with my name at the top and Edward's signature at the bottom. They'd already filed paperwork. There was also a handwritten note on church stationery. "Margaret, they have been inquiring about your mental competence. Do not sign anything. Protect yourself. Father Michael." I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in layers. The years I'd spent paying their debts, the holidays I'd hosted, the way they used to kiss my cheek and say, "You're the glue that holds us together, Mom." Now I understood. They only said that because glue doesn't speak. When I walked back into the main room, the conversation stopped. Vanessa looked up, her face pale. She must have seen the paper in my hand. "What is that?" she asked. "A piece of your future," I said, "and a piece of my past." Edward stood up, defensive. "Mom, you're overreacting. We just wanted to make sure things were handled properly if something ever happened to you." "Like what?" I asked. "An accident? A fire? Maybe an explosion at my cafe?" He blinked, startled. I didn't know yet how close that guess was. Vanessa set her cup down hard enough to crack it. "You're being paranoid. We're your family." I looked at each of them. My two sons, the boys whose diapers I'd changed, whose scraped knees I'd kissed, whose college tuition I'd paid when George died. Family. The word felt foreign now, like something I'd once believed in the way children believe in magic. I folded the document, slid it back into my purse, and said quietly, "If you ever loved me, you'll stay out of my business." Then I turned, walked out of the shop, and locked the door behind me. Outside, the sky had turned that gray-blue color that comes before rain. I could smell roasted coffee and betrayal in the air. I drove straight to Father Michael's church. He was waiting by the steps, as if he knew I'd come. "I read it," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then you know." "Yes," I whispered. "And I also know something else." "What's that?" "That love, when it's one-sided, becomes blindness." He didn't speak, just put a hand on my shoulder. "You have time, Margaret. But be careful. Evil often hides behind concern." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark kitchen with the lights off, listening to the quiet tick of the wall clock. Every sound in the house felt sharper: the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards. In my mind, I saw George sitting across from me, his old work shirt still smelling of roasted beans. He smiled the way he used to when life was simple. "I told you once," he said, in that calm voice memory gives the dead. "Never let anyone make you feel small in your own house." The next morning, when I opened Maple and Morning again, I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the ghost of him. The bell over the door rang. Vanessa walked in, holding a grocery bag and a too bright smile. "Good morning, Mom," she said. "I thought I'd help in the kitchen today. You shouldn't be around the gas stove too much." The words were casual, but the undertone wasn't. I looked at her hands, nails perfectly polished, no warmth in her grip on the bag. Inside, I caught a glimpse of new gas cartridges, the kind we used for the small stoves in the back. And for the first time, I felt something sharper than fear. I felt clarity. 3 days after that morning, Maple and Morning blew up. I still remember its smell, a mixture of burnt coffee, leaking gas, and suffocating gray smoke. The morning of the explosion, Vanessa told me to stay home, saying she would open the shop for one shift. But I was not used to giving my keys to anyone. So I arrived early, as I always did. It was just dawn, sunlight cutting across the Blue Ridge Mountains and glinting off the shop windows. I opened the door, and the smell of old coffee still lingered in the air. I turned on the gas stove to heat water, but oddly, the gas valve needle had been turned all the way. I froze. I only had time to step back. And then there was an explosion. A white ring of light swallowed everything. Glass shattered, metal screamed. I fell to the floor, feeling searing heat brush my cheek. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a cold white hospital room. My arm was wrapped in bandages, my cheek blistered and red. The smell of disinfectant made me choke. In the corner, Edward was talking with the doctor in a low, urgent voice. I only caught a few words: memory, guardianship, sign. When Vanessa saw my eyes open, she hurried over and took my hand. "Oh, Mother, you are awake. Thank God. You were in a coma for nearly a day." She had tears in her eyes, but her gaze did not meet mine. It was all performance. I recognized it immediately. The doctor asked a few simple questions. "Do you remember what happened?" "I only remember the smell of gas. Then the explosion." Edward cut in. "Mother often forgets to turn off the stove. Maybe she forgot to turn it off." That remark, seemingly casual, was the first blade. I wanted to protest, but my voice was hoarse. I looked at Vanessa, and she nodded slightly, as if agreeing with her husband. The next day, Daniel and Melissa came too. Melissa hugged me, gentle like a good daughter. Mother, the important thing is that you are safe, but everyone is worried. The police say the explosion was caused by carelessness. Carelessness of whom? I asked. No one answered. They avoided my eyes as if I were a child who needed comforting, not a mother who had nearly died. The days that followed were hell. I stayed in the hospital for nearly a week, my body aching, but my mind even more numb. My children took turns coming, not to check on me, but to sign papers. They brought thick folders, saying they were insurance and recovery paperwork. I asked to read them carefully, but Vanessa smiled. Mother, you are still not well. Trust me. I only want to spare you worry. I looked at the words on the first page. Power of attorney. The same phrase as the paper in Father Michael's envelope. I smiled, a smile I did not even recognize for how bitter it was. I did not sign. Vanessa's expression changed immediately. It seems you still do not understand the situation, she said smoothly. If you do not sign, restoring the bank account will be very complicated. They need a legal representative. I replied softly, I am not dead yet. No one said anything more. That evening, after they had all left, Father Michael visited. He brought a small bag of fruit and an old Bible. He sat beside my bed, silent for a long while, then asked, Do you believe this accident was really an accident, Margaret? I looked out the window where the city lights flickered like candles. I do not know. But I know they had planned something, I said. He nodded, thoughtful. When greed enters a house, faith is the first thing to leave, he said. That sentence haunted me. When I returned home, I no longer recognized my own kitchen. Some furniture had been moved, a few things gone missing. The wooden box that held important papers, George's wedding ring. Vanessa said they had tidied up for me because I was not strong enough. I remained silent. The feeling of humiliation did not come from being suspected, but from being treated like someone who no longer had the right to exist. That afternoon, while I was making tea, Edward walked in, laughing. The doctor says you may have short-term memory problems. Maybe you should stop managing the shop. Daniel and I will help. Help? I sipped my tea. Or take over? He stopped laughing. What are you talking about? I do not forget, Edward. I have never forgotten anything important in my life, especially those who have turned their backs on me. He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head and left. That night, I could not sleep. I opened a drawer and took out an old ledger where I recorded every income and expense for the shop. A few figures did not match. There were credit card transactions I had never made, home and living store, luxury decor, fine jewelry. The sums were not small, and the name signed on the statements was none other than Melissa Holloway. My throat tightened. Melissa, the daughter-in-law who once called me the kindest mother, had used my name to borrow money. I slowly closed the ledger. No more tears. Only a cold numbness ran down my spine. The next day, I went back to St. Anne. Father Michael was polishing the brass cross on the altar. He looked at me and said quietly, "You must do something, Margaret. Evil only grows when good people remain silent." I replied softly, "I am not sure I am a good person anymore." "Why?" he asked. "Because I have begun to think about ways to make them pay," I said. He was not surprised. "Sometimes justice must pass through anger, but do not let your anger cloud your mind," he said. On the way home, I stopped by the coffee shop, now only a heap of blackened bricks. A few neighbors stood at a distance, whispering, "Poor Mrs. Holloway. At her age to have a gas explosion. I heard she is very senile now. She should have retired long ago." I heard everything. I did not turn back. I just bowed my head and walked slowly past the singed maple and mourning sign. Below, I saw a bent piece of steel carved with the two words George used to hand: carve, home, faith. I collapsed, not from pain, but from the realization that I had lost both. From that day, everything around me changed color. They spoke to me in pitying tones, using sweet words to hide contempt. "You should let us handle it. You need to rest. You do not need to remember much anymore." That form of you, only a generation removed from them, now sounded as if it belonged to another lifetime. I began to write everything down: dates, times, words, actions. Not out of doubt, but because I needed proof that I was still clear-headed. Every time Vanessa came into the house, I studied her eyes, searching for something real. But in them, there was only my own reflection, an old woman adrift in the house she had built. One afternoon, Daniel came and said the insurance would not cover all the damages from the explosion, and it would be better if I signed ownership of the shop over to them, so legal matters would be easier. I asked, "Who told you that?" "My lawyer," he said. "Not mine." He flinched and then avoided my gaze. I understood. Everything had been arranged. That night, I looked in the mirror, studying the face marked by burns and deep eyes. I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. George used to say, "When someone wants to take away your honor, do not argue. Let them think you are weak, then make them regret it." I heard those words again, and, for the first time, they were not philosophy, but survival instructions. Shut my bedroom door and wrote a single line in the ledger. The day they tried to steal my honor was the day I began to take back justice. And I knew the humiliation was not the end. It was only the beginning of a war they did not know they had started. I began with silence. No reaction, no questioning, no complaining. I only remained silent, the kind of silence that guilty people fear most. After the explosion, I knew clearly that weakness was the only gift they wanted me to give. I did not intend to give it to anyone. I sold George S.'s old car and used the money to hire lawyer Graham Mitchell in Charlotte. We met at a small diner by the highway to avoid attention. He was about 50, quiet in bearing, bright-eyed, and spoke with the calm of someone who understood that truth and justice rarely agree. "I need you to help me get back what is mine," I said. "Do you have any evidence?" he asked. "Not yet, but my memory is better than they think." I told him about the explosion, about the power of attorney, about the bank accounts being used improperly. He listened without interrupting, nodding, and occasionally taking notes. Mrs. Holloway, he said finally, we will need an investigator. And before we start, I want you to understand this. This process will not be quick, and it will certainly hurt. I have already suffered pain, Mr. Mitchell, I said. Now I need a reason to keep suffering. He looked at me for so long I had to smile. Do not let my age fool you. I am not finished yet. That afternoon, I returned home. Vanessa was in the kitchen on the phone. Her voice was low, but loud enough to hear. Do not worry, my love. Everything is almost done. When the house is in my name, we can sell the shop and move away. I stepped in and she jumped, forcing a smile. Mother, I was just calling the gas repairman. I thought the shop had already exploded, I asked. She paused. Oh, I meant the stove at home. I did not say anything and only smiled. I already understood. This woman did not know that some battles can only be won with patience. From that day, I began recording. I hid a small recorder in the sugar jar on the dining table and another in the living room. I set my phone to record every time they visited. Conversations that seemed banal slowly became evidence. We must make her believe she is losing her mind. If necessary, change her sedatives. Just let her ruin her memory herself. 1 month is enough. I replayed each phrase until it sounded like a whetstone sharpening a blade. 3 weeks later, Lawyer Mitchell introduced me to Caroline Brooks, a private investigator. She was about 40 and a former police officer. Her eyes were sharp, and her voice left no words wasted. I hear they are building a case that you are incompetent, she said when we first met. That is correct. So you need me to prove that you are not. I need you to prove that they are. Caroline laughed. I like the way you think. She began investigating Edward and Daniel S. finances. After only 10 days, Caroline handed me a thick file. Inside were credit card statements in my name showing luxury purchases and transfers to Melissa Holloway as secondary accounts. Your daughter-in-law is playing a dangerous game, Caroline said. She opened 3 credit cards using your identity. The total debt exceeds $40,000. I looked at the invoices, at the familiar store names and the dates when they claimed to be visiting me. I did not feel anger. I only felt clarity. I began to clean the house again, not to tidy up, but to mark boundaries. I packed George S. remaining things into a box and locked them in my room. I cleared out the refrigerator and threw away items Vanessa had brought. I changed the locks. That evening, Edward came, his face flushed with anger. Mother, why did you change the locks? We live here too, he said. No, I replied calmly. You only stopped by to count my assets. What do you mean by that? He asked. I mean that people have stopped pretending that blood guarantees loyalty. He smiled thinly, but his eyes flashed with fear. After that, they came less often. Only Vanessa dropped by occasionally, always carrying a practiced voice of concern. Mother, I heard the doctor recommends a psychological evaluation after the explosion to be sure you did not suffer memory damage. Really? I asked. Which doctor? Oh, a friend of Edward S. What is the name? I asked. I forgot. I turned on the recorder in my blouse. Then, next time remember, I like to know the name of the person who wants to prove I am crazy. She froze for a second. Mother, why would you say that? I'm only concerned. I smiled. Concerned, but forgetful. That night, I sent all the recordings and the statements to Lawyer Mitchell. He called back within half an hour. Mrs. Holloway, this is elder fraud and identity theft. If you allow it, I will contact the FBI office in Charlotte. I allow it, I said, and I want them to know that the gas explosion was not an accident. I could not sleep after that call. I made tea and sat in the dark, listening to rain on the metal roof. George's voice echoed in my head, gentle as an old warmth. Do not let them take your composure, Margaret. Once you lose it, they will win. I nodded quietly. No, George. This time, I will win with it. The next day, Caroline arrived with news. Vanessa met a man named Paul Haynes, a former convict who specializes in forging documents. I closed my eyes. Fake medical records, right? I asked. Yes. They want certification that you are mentally incompetent. Clever, I said softly. Very clever. Do you want me to set a trap? She asked. Not yet. I want them to keep thinking I am an easy prey. I went to the market, smiled at neighbors, and spoke gently to Vanessa on the phone. I even texted Daniel to wish him good night. On the surface, I was the weak mother. But inside, I was weaving my network back together, thread by thread. One evening, I created a fake Facebook account and friended Vanessa under the name of an old acquaintance. In less than 2 days, she posted a photo of a fancy restaurant in Charleston, alongside a strange man with the caption, "To New Beginnings." I saved the photo and sent it to Caroline. 2 weeks later, Caroline sent her final report. Vanessa had been having an affair for 2 years. Edward had lost his job 8 months ago and owed more than $100,000 in gambling debt. Melissa was the one who registered the fraudulent credit cards. Daniel was collaborating with his sister-in-law to prepare a fake will in case I was declared incompetent. I read the report without shedding a single tear. I closed the file and said, now, they will know who is really losing their mind. Lawyer Mitchell proposed a plan to set a public trap. I would pretend to accept signing a new will. When they arrived, the living room would be recorded, and 2 hidden witnesses from the law office would be present. I agreed. On the appointment day, Vanessa dressed elegantly and brought a thick portfolio. Edward followed, his face tight. Mother, we only want everything to be clear. If anything happens, the property will be divided equally so you can live peacefully. Yes, I replied. Peaceful in death is better. They forced smiles. I pretended my hand trembled as I held the pen. Do I sign here? I asked. Yes, Vanessa said. On the line with your name. I signed, but not with my real signature. Moments later, 2 people from Mitchell S. office entered and showed their notary badges. This signing has been legally recorded. Thank you all for participating, they said. Vanessa went pale. Recorded for what? She demanded. For the entire conversation, including mentions of dividing the estate after mother dies. This is admissible evidence. I looked at them calmly and said, you have just signed your own confession. I hope my signature is still pretty, because it will be in the court record. Vanessa protested, and Edward stammered, but I stood up, calmer than ever. I did not shout or cry. I only said, "Thank you, children. Because of you, I now know the true value of kindness. It is worth exactly the amount of money you plan to steal." When they left, I looked out the window as rain began to fall. The teapot on the table still smelled of warmth. I poured a cup, watched the thin steam rise, and told myself, I taught them how to love once. Now, I will teach them how to face the consequences. And in that rain, I knew that my war for justice had just begun. I once thought justice was a courtroom with a jury, attorneys, and a verdict pronounced in silence. Now I know. Justice begins the moment we stop being silent. After the signing of the will, I sent all the recordings, video, and financial evidence to Attorney Mitchell. 3 days later, he called me. "Mrs. Holloway, the FBI has taken the case, but they want additional proof confirming transactions with Paul Haynes, the man who forges documents. If we can capture a direct exchange between him and Edward, the case will become a federal crime." I nodded, though he could not see me. "Leave it to me. Old people sometimes make others let their guard down." That night, I called Edward. "My son, I have changed my mind," I said gently. "I think maybe you are right. Maybe I need someone to help with the paperwork. Could you recommend your lawyer?" On the other end, his voice was timid, then dropped like someone who had just won a bet. "Of course, Mother. I will arrange with Paul. He specializes in medical files and legal paperwork for the elderly." He did not know my phone was recording, and that every time he said Paul, it would become evidence. 2 days later, I received a message. "Meeting at your house, 3 p.m. Paul will come to review the files." I told Attorney Mitchell. 2 FBI agents, disguised as utility workers, waited outside the gate. Their car parked 2 houses down. When Paul Haynes entered, I recognized him immediately. A man of about 50 with salt and pepper hair, a battered briefcase, and shifty eyes. Edward and Vanessa came with him, faces tight. "Hello, Mrs. Holloway," Paul said in a low voice. "I hear you need to certify legal capacity. I need confirmation that I'm still clear enough to manage my affairs," I replied, purposely emphasizing clear enough. He paused, then offered a thin laugh. "Oh, of course. Just a few signatures, a few stamps." I signaled for them to sit at the table. A teapot and a plate of cookies sat ready. The mood felt more like a family meeting than a scheme. "Paul," Edward said, "we need a psychological certificate for my mother. The doctor will sign it, right?" "Right," he answered, "as long as she does not object." I looked him straight in the eye. "What if I object?" "Then," he shrugged, "there are other ways." At that moment, the door burst open. 2 FBI agents entered and showed their badges. "Paul Haynes, you are under arrest for conspiracy to forge federal medical records," Vanessa screamed. Edward froze. I remained seated, holding my teacup, my voice calm. "I told you, children, this tea tastes better with truth." Vanessa screamed that I had set them up. "I only gave you the chance to bury yourselves." As they were handcuffed and led to the car, I watched through the window. Rain fell on the cobblestone road, reflecting the flashing police lights. I did not feel joy. I felt a strange quiet, as if justice were not loud, but simply the restoration of order. The case went to federal court in Charlotte. The press called it the elder fraud case of Asheville. They wrote about me as if I were the symbol of thousands of elderly people deceived by their children. But behind the headlines only, I knew that justice never arrives easily. It comes at the cost of solitude. The first trial opened in June. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Vanessa wore a black dress and her face was pale. Edward wore a rumpled suit. They sat in the defendant's row, avoiding looking at me. Attorney Mitchell whispered, "Stay calm. The truth carries weight." When the prosecutor played the recordings, Edward's voice came through clearly on the speaker. "We will change her medication. 1 month, and she will believe she is losing her mind." The courtroom fell deadly silent. I heard someone swallow hard. Vanessa bowed her head. Edward closed his eyes. Then the video of the signing played. The footage showed me sitting calmly in the middle while they pressured me to sign. I did not look at the screen. I did not need to. I had already lived that moment. Their attorney tried to defend them. "Your Honor, my clients only wanted to protect their mother. It is a family misunderstanding." I laughed, soft but resonant in that quiet room. Misunderstandings do not create forgery. They create distance. This is a crime. The judge rapped for order. But in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that was not only the law, but a father who understood betrayal. After 2 weeks of testimony, the verdict came. Edward received 12 years in prison, and Vanessa 10 years for conspiracy to commit fraud, forging medical documents, and exploiting an elderly person's assets. When the judge read their names, I did not feel triumph. I felt as if I were burying my own children, not with blood, but with trust. After the trial, the reporters followed me. "Mrs. Holloway, are you satisfied with the sentence?" they asked. I answered calmly, "Justice is not for satisfaction. It is for remembrance." That night, I sat alone in my temporary apartment in Charlotte. Outside the window, autumn shaded the street with yellow leaves. I turned on a lamp, made tea, and took from the drawer a handwritten letter from Father Michael. "Margaret, if you choose justice instead of hatred, God will be with you. But remember, justice punishes sin, not love." I read it many times. Perhaps he wanted me to understand that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. 3 days later, Melissa, the younger daughter-in-law, came to find me. She stood on the stoop in a thin coat, and her face was hollow. "I'm sorry, Mother," she said. "I knew about everything, but I was silent. I was afraid of Daniel." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because they plan to pin everything on me. They say I opened the credit cards and forced them to do it." I looked at her and saw true panic in her eyes. "Do you have proof?" I asked. She nodded and handed me a USB drive. "It is recordings of them plotting to frame me. I want to help you, not for my own sake, but for yours. I owe you the truth." I accepted it and said softly, "Thank you, Melissa. But if you truly want to help, testify in court." She did. At the second trial, Melissa testified and laid out the entire plan from the gas explosion to hiring Paul Haynes. Her testimony was the final hammer that closed their case. Afterward, she broke down in tears. I hugged her gently, not as forgiveness, but because I saw in her the reflection of myself, a woman who had lived in fear and sacrificed poorly. In the end, justice did not come only from the courtrooms, but from the moment I sat in an empty room, knowing that no one had the right to lie to me anymore. I thought of George and the smell of morning coffee and his hoarse laugh. I imagined him saying, "You did it, Margaret. You saved yourself." I looked out the window as the sky turned orange over the trees. A breeze touched my shoulder like a light hand. I took my notebook and wrote the final line under plans. Justice is not revenge. It is when the betrayer is forced to look at himself in the mirror. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and in the fading glow of dusk, I felt one thing clearly. I was no longer the wounded woman. I was the one who had survived. Deech sung, Tiangan, Mi Danai. After the final trial, I did not go home right away. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of Charlotte, an ordinary place where no one knew my name. I only needed silence and a window open to a wide enough sky to hear the wind. In the first few days, I barely spoke to anyone. I made tea, read the Bible, and rewrote each memory. Not to remember, but to understand. Justice, I realized, does not bring joy. It brings an emptiness, the emptiness between what I have lost and what I am becoming. I once thought that when they were sentenced, I would feel relief. But every night, I woke drenched in sweat, the image of Edward and Vanessa in handcuffs, replaying in my mind. I did not pity them. I pitied myself. I pitied the woman who once believed that love could redeem souls that never wanted to be saved. One morning, Father Michael called. "Margaret," he said, "you have won. But true victory is not in court. It is in being able to forgive yourself." I was silent for a while. Forgive myself? Forgiving too much without setting boundaries. Even kindness needs discipline. I smiled faintly. I think I have forgotten how to forgive. "No," he said. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is when you can look at your pain without trembling." That sentence stayed with me for many days. I began taking morning walks around Freedom Park. June in North Carolina smelled of damp leaves and freshly cut grass. Strangers greeted me with smiles. No one knew I was the woman the whole city had once talked about. I liked that. I was finally just an ordinary person again. One morning, I saw Melissa sitting on a bench by the lake, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't think I'd see you here," I said softly. She looked up, tired eyes meeting mine. "I heard you were in Charlotte. I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For not letting them destroy me with silence. If you hadn't brought everything to light, I might have gone down with them." I sat beside her. "You don't owe me thanks, but you owe yourself a new beginning." Melissa nodded, sighing. "I'm applying for a job at a senior care center. I think maybe I understand how they feel better than anyone now." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw light in her eyes. "Do it," I said. "But remember, don't help others so much that you lose yourself again." She smiled, weary but genuine. "I learned that from you." That evening, I went home and brewed a pot of black coffee. The smell still reminded me of maple and morning. Now, just rubble and ashes. But in my memory, it remained intact. The wooden windows, the old chairs, the sound of George's laughter. I could still hear him saying, "Margaret, when everything collapses, don't rebuild it exactly as it was. Let it be different." let it live. Maybe that was when I realized I didn't want to rebuild the old cafe. I wanted to build something else, something that meant more. I called Attorney Mitchell and asked him to help transfer the restitution money the court had ordered Edward and Vanessa to pay me. I want to create a small foundation, I said, for older women who've been deceived or have lost faith in their families. He sounded surprised. Are you sure? After everything they did, you're still thinking of others? I'm not thinking of them, I said. I'm thinking of myself. If I'd had someone to help me, maybe I wouldn't have had to endure so much loneliness. We named it the Holloway Foundation for Elder Justice. The name felt like a scar, but it was a scar I wanted to keep. One afternoon, I received a letter from prison. It was from Edward. I opened it and read each line, hearing his voice in my head. Mother, I don't expect forgiveness, but here, every night, I think of how you looked at me in court. Not angry, not hateful, just sad. I want you to know I understand now. You were right. I only knew how to love when it benefited me. And when I lost everything, I finally understood what it meant to lose you. I folded the letter and set it on the table without replying. Some doors, once closed, stay that way. Not out of hate, but for peace. In July, Father Michael visited. He brought a small package. Inside was an old wooden rosary. George left this with me years ago, he said. He told me, if Margaret ever loses sight of God, give it back to her. I held the rosary in my hand, feeling the smooth wood against my fingers. He always knew I'd lose my way, I said. Not lose it, Father Michael replied. You just went too far. Now you've found your way back. I looked out the church window. The afternoon sun poured gold through the stained glass. I thought of everything. The mornings I brewed coffee for my sons, the nights I cried when they called me a burden. And I realized the worst part of betrayal isn't losing faith in others. It's losing faith in yourself. Today, I had found it again. I returned to Asheville at the end of the month. The town looked the same, only I was different. Where Maple and Morning once stood was now an empty lot. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of old ashes mixed with wind. A few neighbors passed by and waved. Mrs. Holloway, are you planning to reopen the cafe? I smiled. No, but I'm going to plant flowers here. A few weeks later, the land had become a small garden filled with lavender pots and a wooden sign that read, "For those who love too much and learned too late." I saw elderly people stop by, sitting beneath the trees, sipping tea I brewed. No signs, no money, just peace. One autumn afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the trees, I sat on a wooden bench and wrote the final line in my journal of justice. I cannot change what I have lost, but I can change how I live with it. I have forgiven, not because they deserve it, but because I no longer want to carry them in my heart. Kindness has limits, but peace does not. I closed the notebook and listened to the wind rustling through the leaves. In it, I thought I heard George's voice whisper, "Welcome home, Margaret." And for the first time in years, I felt truly light. The following autumn, Asheville settled into a gentle hush of wind. The maple leaves turned red. not as bright as before, but as if bowing softly, understanding time. I was 71, and for the first time, I was no longer afraid of growing old. I lived in a small house near the Blue Ridge Hills, about a 5-minute walk from the old maple and morning garden. From my living room window, I could see sunlight spilling over the trees and hear the church bells of St. Anne every Sunday morning. My life had become very simple. In the morning, I made coffee and opened the garden gate for the neighborhood elders to visit. They called it the Lavender Garden. In the afternoon, I wrote letters, read the paper, and watered the plants on the porch. At night, I sat by the fireplace listening to the wood crackle, sometimes sipping a bit of black tea. I no longer thought of Edward or Vanessa. They were still serving their sentences. From time to time, I received letters, words of remorse repeated over and over, written perhaps to seek forgiveness I was not yet ready to give. But I no longer felt anger. I simply let go. Forgiveness is not acceptance. It is setting down the burden and walking on. In October, the Holloway Foundation officially opened. There was no ribbon cutting, no media, just a few older women who, like me, had been deceived by their own families. We sat around a wooden table, drinking coffee and sharing our stories. Some had lost all their money. Some had been thrown out of their homes. I listened with all the patience life had taught me. One woman, Dorothy Evans, 73, told us her son had sold her house while she was in the hospital. When she said it, she broke down, crying. I took her hand. You are not the only one, but you are the first to speak, and that is the first step to reclaiming yourself. The room fell silent except for the ticking clock. In that moment, I understood that my purpose was no longer revenge or even justice. It was to turn pain into refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. One early winter morning, as the first snow began to fall, I received a parcel from Father Michael. Inside was a short letter and a photograph. The picture showed the church garden where I had first met him, the day he gave me the envelope that changed my life. On the back, he had written, "Justice can teach fear, but compassion teaches change. Father Michael." I smiled and placed the photo on the table by the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, its reflection warm as a blessing. One afternoon at the farmer's market, I spotted a familiar face, Melissa, my former daughter-in-law, now working for a senior care center. She saw me and stopped. We looked at each other across a few meters of space. She walked closer and spoke softly. "I heard you started a foundation here. I want to help." I looked into her eyes. The fear that once lived there was gone. Only sincerity remained. "I need people like you," I said. "Not to serve, but to lead. You've been on the other side. You know how they think. Now, help those who can't speak for themselves." Melissa nodded, tears glimmering. "Thank you, Mother." As she walked away, I realized something. Redemption doesn't belong only to those who did wrong. It also comes to the ones who were hurt. When we are kind enough to give others a chance to be right again. By the next spring, the Lavender Garden had become a neighborhood gathering place. Every Friday afternoon, we hosted tea at 4, a small get-together where elders shared stories, experiences, and laughter. Sometimes I told my own story, but only the beginning. about the cafe, about George, about mornings scented with cinnamon and the sound of jazz. I never spoke of betrayal or courtrooms. They didn't need to hear it, and I didn't need to repeat it. One woman asked me, "Do you ever feel lonely, Margaret?" I thought for a moment, then answered, "Loneliness is a kind of quiet. If you know how to listen, it answers many questions." That evening, I sat alone on a garden bench. The sky was clear. The wind carried the scent of lavender. I opened my last notebook, not the Journal of Justice, but the Journal of Peaceful Days. I wrote, "Once, I thought I was born to be a mother, to care, to give, to love. Now I know I was born to live, not just to exist in someone else's story. I lost my cafe, I lost my family, but I found myself again. I am no longer the woman trembling in a burning house, but the one planting seeds in the ashes. I have learned that love is truly beautiful, only when it does not demand perfection." I set down the pen and watched the sun sink behind the hill. The last light spread across the lavender blossoms, making the garden seem alive and breathing. In that moment, I heard a piano playing faintly in the distance, the familiar tune George used to play every evening at the cafe. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm home, George. I've found myself again." A week later, the local radio invited me to their program, Voices of Asheville, to share my story. I agreed, not to tell a tragedy, but to speak about renewal. The host asked, "If you could go back to the moment before everything began, would you change anything?" I smiled and answered slowly, "No. I would still love, still trust, still give. The only difference is that this time, I wouldn't forget to love myself first." That night, when I returned home, I lit a candle on the wooden table and opened the window to the breeze. Outside, the moonlight spread across the garden like a silk veil. I heard the wind moving through the trees, the scent of lavender soft as breath. I spoke to myself, my voice steady and sure. I've learned that kindness cannot save everyone, but it saves the best part of who I am. I've learned that justice is not about winning or losing, but about facing the truth without fear. And I've learned that love doesn't need to be returned. It only needs not to betray its own heart. The candle flickered gently. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, landing on an old photo of me and George at Maple and Morning. We were laughing, each holding a cup of coffee, and behind us was a wooden sign scrawled with the words, "Open Hearts, Open Mornings." I smiled and touched the photo lightly. Outside, the church bells rang, echoing through the air. A new day had begun, and I, the woman who once lost everything, was alive again, whole and at peace. And you, if one day the person you love the most is the one who hurts you the most, will you choose to forgive or choose to save yourself? I really want to hear your thoughts. Please share with me in the comments section, because every story, every perspective is a piece that helps us understand more about people's hearts and about ourselves. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. Thank you for taking the time to listen to a story, not only of Margaret, but of many of us. People who have loved, sacrificed, and are learning to love ourselves again. If you feel something from this story, please leave a comment, a greeting, a heart, or simply 2 words, "I understand." Because sometimes empathy is also a healing. And don't forget, in the next video, we'll meet another mom with a secret that will tear her family apart and a lesson you won't forget.